A few years ago, my wife was watching a home improvement show and they used shiplap as part of a remodel. She loved the idea, and so when I found this reclaimed 100-year-old barnwood on Facebook, I jumped at the opportunity and I bought it. It sat in storage for a couple years, and then finally got around to remodeling the bathroom once we decided on the rest of the redesign. I cut the boards down using my circular saw and my table saw, got them to a rough length, and then took a lot of time to make sure I had nice straight edges, so when I put them up on the wall they would sit flush without a lot of gaps between. Some of the boards were a bit warped, so it did take some work to make sure I had those straight edges and also that the edges were parallel to one another. And there were a few like this one that didn't have a straight edge at all to begin with. So a little tip here, when you're using your table saw, if your fence isn't long enough for the board you're doing to get a nice flat edge, use another board that you know is flat as a reference, and then once that first edge is cut flush, you can follow up the other one. To get a little bit more mileage out of the boards, I resawed them in half. One, because it made it easier to apply them to the wall when they were thinner, didn't eat up quite as much space in the room, and two, because I got two boards out of each one that I would be able to use for the wall. Once the boards were all resawn in half, I took them back to the table saw and cut them down to their final length. I used a wire brush instead of a sander to smooth out the surface of the boards. I wanted to make sure we could keep that rough sawn look and you could see the saw marks. So by using a wire brush you can remove a lot of the dirt and grime without actually removing those saw marks. And used my router to round over the edges so I was putting them on the wall, it would be easier to fit it into place. It was a pretty dusty process, so I finished it up outside. Then it was time to put a protective finish on the wood. So I set up my pop-up spray tent shelter from HomeRite and prepared it to spray all the boards. To spray them, I used the Finish Max Super. It's a really easy to use sprayer system from HomeRite. And for this particular build, I used the blue tip, which is a 1.5 millimeter. You can get a variety of different tips, the 1.5, the 2, and a 4, as well as some others, and they can be used with different types of paints. So for this one, because it's a clear finish and rather thin, I want a really smooth finish. I'm using the smallest. You can use the medium one for milk paints and other products, and then the largest, the 4 millimeter, for latex paints. So a lot of different options, which really opens up possibilities to get a professional finish pretty easily with pretty much any product you can find in a can. The Finish Max sprays in a fan pattern, and you can adjust that vertically, horizontally, or an angle in between by rotating the air cap nozzle. I use General Finishes Exterior 450, mostly because this will be in the bathroom and probably have water sprayed on it, especially since I have young kids. I rotated the intake tube forward because I'd be mostly spraying in the downward direction. I did a test spray on a piece of cardboard to make sure that I had my spray pattern the way I wanted. First spray came out a little thick, so I adjusted the spray gun and then followed up with another test, and once I was happy with that, it was time to move on to the rest of the boards. Just took nice even strokes, 8 to 10 inches away from the board, and the job went by pretty quickly. I think each coat, I did a series of 3 coats, each one took probably about 3 minutes. So very fast application, which would have taken probably about 10 times as long if I hadn't been using the sprayer, especially with the texture on the surface of these boards. And I'm really happy with how the finish turned out. After I finished prepping the boards, it was time to install the concrete sink. I have a whole nother build video if you're interested in seeing how I made the sink. And basically just installed the sink by installing 2 boards on either side of the wall that the sink rested on top of. The hardest part of this was just making sure everything was level and even across both sides. Now, unfortunately, as I was installing this, the battery on the camera died. So I don't have the rest of the video, but the install was pretty straightforward. With the sink in place, it was time to start putting up the shiplap. So I drilled some holes to have clearance for the faucet that would be coming out of the wall. And then started mounting the boards. I made sure I painted the back wall behind the boards a darker color so that any gaps or holes, nail holes in the boards, and then there were some small gaps between even after straightening them on the table saw, wouldn't be nearly as obvious because the black helps to hide that. Just used a nail gun into the studs and worked my way up. The boards had a lot of character, so to make sure that we had the best layout, my wife and I put them on the floor and arranged to make sure that we had the look that we were going for, and then it was easy to just take each board and mount it to the wall from there. Installing the faucet was a pretty quick process. Just screwed the pieces into place and then tightened down the set screws. Next up was reusing the mirror that had been in the bathroom previously. So to do this, I laid it out on a piece of plywood and traced it so I could get an outline for a backer that I would be gluing to the back of the mirror. So laid that out, used some of the standoffs from Rockler with bench cookies. It's a great way to raise this up off of a surface to be able to use a jigsaw. And once that was cut off, I came over to the belt sander and just smoothed out up to the line. I used a template to draw 1.5 inches in from the outside, and then cut one more time with the jigsaw and sand it again to get it nice and smooth, because this would be my final piece. I wanted it inside about 1.5 inches so you wouldn't be able to see the edge, especially once I add the LED lights, which you'll see in a moment. I used a construction adhesive to mount the wood to the back of the mirror. I was a little worried that it might eat through or be able to see through, but this worked great. Definitely something to look into though if you're going to be using an adhesive, because sometimes it will eat away at the back surface of the mirror. So this is just an LED kit that I got from Amazon. Really easy to use, has a remote control and costs on roughly $20. I can include a link down below in the description. I used a palm router with a bit to remove a channel that I could run the wires through, so I would be able to have the control recessed inside and just secure those wires with some hot glue. I removed the housing of the controller so it wouldn't be quite as thick and could sit down inside of the plywood. To mount the mirror to the wall, I just did some recessed holes and secured some standard picture hanging wire with a screw and a washer. Then back in the bathroom, just put 2 screws in that I could run that picture hanging wire over. Then to install the mirror, I just plugged in the outlet that was mounted behind the wall and then used the wire over the screws and was good to go. The next part of the project was to build a box that some pendant lights would hang from the ceiling on. So again, use the barnwood, this time I'm keeping it the full thickness, cut a bottom and 2 sides, and then drilled some pocket holes so that I'd be able to use to mount the 2 pieces together. I secured the pieces together using some pocket screws. So the lights from these are standard pendant lights that I was able to purchase off of Amazon. Don't want to have the covers, the ceiling plates on, so remove those. And then found a drill bit that matched the diameter of the plug from the plate, and drilled some holes in random locations on the top of the box to be able to mount those. As a friction fit with the pieces, I did end up adding some glue later, a little bit of cyanoacrylate super glue, just to make sure they didn't move, but they were a nice tight fit. So I ended up going with 4 of these lights, got them all randomly installed along the surface of the box beam, and then wired them all together with an extra cord that I had from a previous project. Wiring these up was pretty simple. Just wired all the grounds together, all the line, all the neutral, and then just came back with some wire nuts and some electrical tape to make sure everything stayed together. So an important consideration is to make sure that you're always following your local electrical code if you are doing any type of electrical project like this. To mount these to the ceiling, I created just some little mounting blocks, as you can see from this little clip here. Glued a few blocks together to get some depth, and then had a piece that would mount to the ceiling, and then the bottom piece here is what actually locks into some channels that I'm going to be adding to the light itself. So pretty simple overall. These are just some little pine pieces, some countersunk holes that I'll be screwing on the inside and lining up so that those mounts from the ceiling that you just saw me building will be able to slide underneath those and hold it in place, but still have an easily removable beam in case I need to get to the vent above or for some reason get to the electrical. So to replace the air vent that was there, I bought an inline fan that'll be mounted up above, installed a new outlet, making sure that the two different ends of the outlet were independent of each other so they could each be controlled off of a different switch on the wall. And then installed some plywood pieces behind the drywall to give me a nice solid surface to mount the supports into for the beam. Use pencil marks that you can see on the ceiling to get everything centered and lined up. Plugged in the beam and then slid it on over the mounts and was good to go. Then the last big piece of the bathroom was building the drawer under the sink. I used Baltic bricked plywood to build the frame for this. Now the tricky part was making sure it would span the full distance without interfering with the drain in the center. Once it was all built, I used my Finish Max Super to spray the same polyurethane I used for the shiplap backing boards, and it made nice quick work of the finish. Because this part would be handled a little bit more frequently than the shiplap, I did do a sanding between each coat to ensure a nice smooth surface. Overall, I'm really happy with how this bathroom turned out. Had some great learning experiences, especially with making a concrete sink, as well as using some barnwood. Some of the details that I didn't show in this video, like the laser cut vent on the floor, as well as some of the painted fixtures, like the toilet paper holder, and some of the other items that I used some bronze paint to tie in with the faucet, really pull everything together. If you haven't already, go check out my 10 tips for a better bathroom remodel to see how I prepped this bathroom to install all of these fixtures. I'd love to hear any feedback you have on this project or answer any questions you may have, so throw them in the comments below. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more, hit that subscribe button with the little bell so you get notification the next time I have a video come out. Life is what you make it. Make something great.